Which players are you expecting to break out this fall from Decatur, Georgia? I got so many of them. And it was a really, I guess, good timing that David asked this question, because on 247sports.com, I think even right now, there's an article where a lot of our guys outlined several, and I cherry-picked some of theirs and added in some of my own. Don't you have to start this conversation at Penn State? You could go Kalen King if you wanted to, but I go Drew Aller. Because Kalen King, I think, is already on the radar. The corner could very well be the best in the country this upcoming year. Drew Aller, the quarterback, though, this is a potential turning point for this program. You know, Drew Aller, not a true freshman. He came in as a 5-star quarterback, highest-rated signee at that position that James Franklin and his staff have had, and he's 6'5", 238, really big kid, sharp, got all the physical tools. That's why they put 5 of those stars next to his name. Didn't have to start right away. He played a little bit in his freshman season, but didn't have to start right away. And he's got an incredibly loaded roster around him. So I know there's no sure thing. I'm not calling Drew Aller a sure thing. I'm just saying if I picture how this season's going to go, not being able to project injuries, of course. So if he's healthy all year, thinking about how this season could go, there are several more scenarios where he ends up shining in his first year as a starter than he just disappoints and doesn't live up to expectation. I don't think the bust potential is very high with him. Also, speaking of the quarterback position, a name that I think out of the 8 names I'm going to mention here, I think a name that's as well known on this list as any is Cade Klubnik, but yet he hasn't really gotten time to shine yet. So that's the quarterback at Clemson. That's the future. That's the guy they've been looking towards. And DJ Uiagalelei transferred out, so it's 100% Cade Klubnik time now. He played a little bit last year, and it was kind of a weird situation. So anyway, job's his now. Number 2 quarterback in the 2022 class, 6'2", 195, and he gets Garrett Riley as his offensive coordinator, who just came in from TCU. And I always think in my mind, yeah, we're tuned in, and most of our audience is tuned in to college football, and you never tune out. But someone could have been on their honeymoon recently. Someone could have been going through challenging times in their life recently, and you just haven't had time for college football. So if that's the case, hate it for you. We're thinking about you. Welcome back. What if I told you that TCU's offensive coordinator went to Clemson? Like, that's still news to some people, and I have to remind myself of that sometimes. So that's a godsend, obviously, for Cade Klubnik and the entire offensive roster there at Clemson. And that's going to be a program this year where even though they won the ACC championship, you know what the overall narrative is around Clemson. They're slipping. They're down a little bit. I may have contributed to that, although I don't think they're slipping nearly as much as some of you do, judging by my inbox. But so let's go the 2 quarterbacks there. Now, I'm going to throw a name at you that I think far fewer of you are familiar with, not including those of you up in Muncie, Indiana, and that would be former Ball State running back Carson Steele. Sometimes I think parents are having kids and naming them specifically with a future in football in mind, because it does not get much better than Carson Steele. General Booty notwithstanding, it doesn't get much better than Carson Steele. If you're a degenerate and you love MAC football on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights, MACtion, as we call it on the streets, you've seen him play. But he's gone to UCLA now, so a lot more people are going to see him play. He had 1,556 yards, 14 touchdowns, about 5.4 yards per carry this past year. The important part is he led FBS, I think. He was number 1 overall in college football in yards after initial contact. So you were used to seeing Zach Charbonnet shine at UCLA last year, and he was a transfer in his own right. This is the next one. Pretty much the same size, 6'1", about 215, flowing locks. They'll easily extend beyond the helmet, so very marketable look there, and I know how much you guys care about that. Carson Steele. I continue to tell you, I think the game is coming back to Chip Kelly with the way that he can just go out and acquire talent via the portal. Game's coming back to him. Tennessee's got a wide receiver that I just talked about marketable names. Squirrel White's a really good one as well. And Squirrel White is probably about as poised to step into that Jalen Hyatt role as anyone on that roster. Had good numbers last year, really good numbers in the Clemson game. In the bowl game, had 9 catches, 108 yards, had a touchdown, and that concluded his true freshman season. Little bit different body type than Hyatt. Can still run as fast as Jalen Hyatt. He's 5'10", 165, probably a little more shifty, but he's a guy who put up the kind of numbers the year before I think he's going to explode that Jalen Hyatt did. Hyatt exploded this past year. You look at his numbers the year before, kind of similar to what Squirrel White's were. And in the SEC, I don't want to just stay in Knoxville, although I think that the quarterback position is going to dominate spring ball conversation. Squirrel White is probably going to dominate regardless of who the quarterback is on the field this fall. There's another wide receiver in the SEC named Malik Neighbors down at LSU, and I don't think a lot of people realize he was an 1,000-yard receiver this past year. I just don't think a lot of people remember that. 72 catches, just over 1,000 yards receiving, and he's an excellent 50-50 ball guy. Contested catch rate was 62% for him last year. So he is a guy that will go and fight for the ball, really good at that. Year two, you got that whole deal going for you regardless of what position you play at LSU. I could just as easily have thrown Mason Smith in this. He's the big defensive tackle that went down against FSU in week 1, poised for a big year. So just take what you said about him last year and fast forward to this year. But yeah, Malik Neighbors and Squirrel White, love how both of those guys project this year. What about Georgia? Michael Williams. Hardaway High School's Michael Williams. Most of you didn't grow up in Columbus, Georgia. I did. Carver, Central, just across the river in Phoenix City. Shaw, Harris County High School, just north of town. Yeah, they'll put guys in Power 5 leagues. Hardaway, bless their hearts, not so much. Except that they may have the best defensive lineman in the country that just so happens to hail from Hardaway High School. Go Hawks. And it's his time at Georgia. Now, had 28 tackles, 4.5 sacks this past year. He had a lot of impressive numbers, played 291 snaps. So when you combine the numbers he put up with understanding how many snaps he played, you realize they've just got another one, don't they? Yes, they've actually got a few of them. That's how Georgia rolls. Michael Williams is just one of them. Really, really good player that probably is only going to get better because that's also the way Georgia has rolled. That's not a place right now that's struggling in the developmental department. That's not a place where a kid shines as a true freshman and then you watch him his sophomore and junior years and you say, well, he just kind of was the same player. Nope. There's a linear progression. Year 1, year 2, year 3. That's when you know your program's humming. Dallas Turner over at Alabama. Not that you don't already know the name, but Will Anderson's out the door. And so that was Will Anderson's contract year this past year. He's going to be a top 10 draft pick. Now Dallas Turner gets his contract year. And I have a strange suspicion Dallas Turner will end up being a top 10 draft pick. His average pressure rate was about every 8.5 pass rush snaps per game last year. So I know as a defensive whole, they kind of underachieved there. Dallas Turner's a phenomenal player. Got a new defensive staff pretty much over there this year. Dallas Turner, I'm not going to waste a lot of time on him because we already know his name, but Will Johnson at Michigan is one other name that I wanted to mention. 6'2", 194. He's a corner who didn't start right away in his true freshman year. I believe last year was his true freshman year. He didn't start right away, except he ended up starting later in the year. You know, he played the Ohio State game. He played in the Big Ten Championship game. He played against TCU. He had 2 picks, gave up no touchdowns, gave up 1 catch of 20 or more yards. Really good. Prototype corner. A lot of the NFL folks already talk about him, and that's just from that very limited sample size of game tape. Like I had guys who work in the NFL scouting world for a living saying, we're not really scouting him for next year because he's not available to come out for the draft, but he's one that when we're watching other guys, we just happen to see the Johnson kid from Michigan. Yep, I think we'll be saying that a lot about him this year. Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure and leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.